Imagine like paying top dollar for this highly exclusive, intensely secretive dungeon experience. You're going in hoping for this afternoon of profound psychological exploration.
Right. You want the whole dark, mysterious illusion.
Exactly. But then somehow you end up doing a literal sack race across the floor in a hefty garbage bag.
Which, I mean, it definitely shatters that dark illusion we usually associate with that world, doesn't it?
Completely. And that is exactly why we are going there today. So a massive welcome to you, the learner.
Yes, welcome to the deep dive.
Our mission today is to explore a world that, it seems wildly taboo on the surface, but it actually holds a mirror up to the most ordinary parts of our lives.
It really does.
We're pulling from a truly fascinating, super candid conversation from the Dutch YouTube channel De Telegraaf. And our guides for this deep dive are a high-class escort named Sophie and a BDSM coach named Mistress Louise.
And, when you first encounter sources like this stuff focused on high-class escorting and BDSM, the immediate assumption is just, well, it's strictly about sex.
Right. Or like rebellion just for the sake of rebellion.
Yeah, exactly. But the deeper you look into this interview, the more you realize it is actually this masterclass in human psychology.
Oh, totally.
It's about the audacity it takes to reclaim control of your life and really the radical honesty required to figure out what you genuinely need when society isn't watching you.
Yes. And I think the wildest part of this deep dive isn't, the leather or the whips or anything. The most surprising takeaway you're going to get from this conversation has literally nothing to do with physical pain or pleasure.
No, not at all. The core of this material is actually about using extreme, almost unimaginable trust to achieve a complete nervous system reset.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. It's about how psychological surrender can literally completely rewire your physiological state.
So, let's figure out how someone even gets there.
Right.
Because the way this journey starts for people is just fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's not usually what you'd expect.
Right. You don't just wake up one morning with a fully formed, deep-seated knowledge of your own psychological extremes. For Sophie, the escort, in this interview, she had this massive realization completely by accident.
During a course, right.
Yeah, during a BDSM course she took with Mistress Louise. I like to call it her blindfold epiphany.
The blindfold epiphany, it's such a perfect case study, really, in how latent psychological traits get activated.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it requires an external trigger to bypass our conscious filters.
And the trigger was so incredibly simple. Sophie's with a client, and this guy says, very casually, that he wants to blindfold her.
Right.
And instead of going along with it, her immediate visceral internal reaction was just, "Excuse me, who do you think you are? Hell no."
She was just completely repulsed by the idea of giving up her control in that room.
Exactly. So instead of just saying no, she actually completely flips the script.
Yeah.
She demands to blindfold him first.
Which is a really crucial pivot. She didn't just reject submission, She actively seized dominance.
Yes. And she says that in that exact moment, she realized she naturally craves the power. She felt it instantly. She needed to be the one dictating the terms.
It just clicked for her.
It did. And think about a time in your own life where you unexpectedly felt entirely in control. Maybe you had to suddenly take over a chaotic family trip.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. Or you stepped in to run a total disaster of a meeting and you just felt that sudden rush of competence. It's a mild version of what Sophie experienced.
Yeah.
She basically realized, oh, wow, I genuinely love telling people where to stand and what to do.
Like an accidental middle manager.
Yes, a natural-born middle manager, but in a wildly different setting.
And what's vital to understand here is that she didn't, logically reason her way into this realization. It was a complete reflex.
Right, it was just instinctive.
Exactly. The environment of the training course with Mistress Louise simply provided the canvas for this innate capacity to show itself.
Which doesn't happen for everyone, right?
No, not at all. Louise actually points out in the source that some women who take her course are totally unsuited for a dominant role. They simply cannot tap into that specific psychological architecture.
But Sophie could.
Oh, Sophie. She had this spontaneous, almost alarming level of creative dominance just waiting to be unleashed.
Alarming is definitely the right word, because her creativity immediately gets slightly unhinged.
It really does.
The moment she realizes she has this power, the ideas start pouring out of her. The interview details this moment where they're discussing how to make submissive clients kneel.
Right.
And Sophie just casually wonders out loud, oh, do you make them kneel on Lego blocks?
Which is just ruthless.
As anyone who has ever navigated a dark hallway with a toddler knows, That is a universally understood form of extreme, exquisite torture.
It's a brilliant, spontaneous leap, though.
And she doesn't stop at the Legos. She immediately starts wondering how many ping pong balls or even more Legos could physically fit in someone's mouth. It's like a dam broke in her brain.
That flood of ideas is exactly what happens when an innate psychological drive is finally unblocked. But, it points to a much deeper mechanism that the source material highlights.
Which is what?
The vast difference between physical arousal and psychological arousal. For Sophie, the act of taking charge, of flipping that script, it triggers a real physiological response.
Right.
She notes that she gets physically aroused, she gets wet, purely from the psychological trigger of being the authority, or even just from a really good kiss.
But she also explicitly clarifies that it's just a trigger, right? Like, she said she doesn't actually climax just from being the boss. It starts the engine, but it doesn't finish the race.
Exactly. But here is where the mechanism of psychological conditioning gets truly fascinating, because then the interview shifts to Mistress Louise.
Okay.
Louise has been practicing this for about 4 years, and she has reached a point where she can achieve climax purely from the psychological power dynamics of wielding a whip. She doesn't even have to touch herself.
Wait, really? Just from the act of holding the power?
Yes, literally just from that. The sheer psychological intensity of the power exchange is entirely sufficient to trigger a physical climax for her.
That is wild.
If you think about the brain as the primary sexual organ, Louise has spent 4 years conditioning a direct neural pathway between the feeling of ultimate authority and physiological release.
Wow.
It's a profound level of mind-body connection that completely bypasses standard physical touch.
I have to interrupt here, though, because, when you talk about someone needing that level of ultimate authority over another human being,
Yeah.
where does that drive actually come from?
That's the big question.
Right, because when Sophie explains her motivations, she says it stems directly from having a profound lack of control when she was young.
Yeah, her childhood.
She describes this past where she was constantly adapting, constantly erasing her own needs, just to stay inside the lines society had drawn for her. She lived exactly how she was supposed to live, and it made her miserable.
Which is a very common psychological precursor, honestly. You construct a life of rigid compliance, and eventually the pressure requires an outlet.
Right, so for her, stepping into the high-class escort world and specifically taking on this dominant role, it became her literal mechanism for taking the reins back.
She's in charge now.
She is the ultimate gatekeeper. She decides who passes her vetting test, she decides what they do, who gets her time. But listening to that, I'm like, highly skeptical.
Skeptical how?
Well, when someone says they dominate people because they had zero control as a kid, that sounds like textbook overcompensation. Like, how do we know this is actual empowerment and not just a trauma response dressed up in leather?
That's a highly perceptive challenge, and it's actually the exact tension the sources grapple with. Is this just bullying as a defense mechanism?
Exactly.
To answer that, we have to look at how Mistress Louise navigated what we can call the sadism versus care dilemma.
Go unpack that for me.
Well, Louise initially struggled intensely with her own sadistic side because she views herself as a sweet, deeply caring, empathetic person.
Which totally makes sense. If you are fundamentally wired for empathy, the idea of enjoying someone else's discomfort should feel like a massive violation of your core programming.
Precisely. It caused a massive internal conflict for her. How can you be a kind person and enjoy inflicting pain?
Right.
But she had this breakthrough conversation with a friend who pointed out the mechanism that separates trauma-driven bullying from true dominance. And that mechanism is explicit consent.
So the consent changes the actual nature of the act.
Entirely. Think of it like being a spotter at a gym for someone lifting incredibly heavy weights.
Okay.
You are intentionally allowing someone to struggle under immense, painful physical pressure, but you are doing it entirely for their benefit based on their explicit request. And the moment they signal they can't handle it, you take the weight off.
Oh, that's a great analogy. So the pain you're facilitating is actually a service.
Yes. Because Louise has absolute clear consent from the submissive, she isn't violating their will. She is fulfilling a deeply held need for them.
So the dominance isn't about crushing them. It's about holding the space for them.
Exactly. And once she realized that her dominance was a consensual gift she was providing, rather than an act of cruelty, it gave her the psychological permission to actually enjoy it without guilt.
That makes a lot of sense.
True dominance, when properly understood, is a profound act of mutual trust. The dominant takes on the immense responsibility of the submissive's well-being. It's the paradox of consensual sadism.
And realizing you have the capacity to hold that space for someone, it seems to be totally transformative. The video highlights this woman named Lois.
Oh, Lois, yeah.
Yeah, she started out in the industry doing the girlfriend experience, which is, very much about accommodating the client, being sweet, kind of shrinking yourself to fit their fantasy.
Very subservient.
Right. But within just 3 months of embracing the BDSM side, Lois completely transformed into an incredibly confident woman.
Because holding absolute boundaries for someone else inevitably teaches you how to hold them for yourself. You can't fake that level of authority. You have to internalize it.
Right. But okay, if someone's nervous system relies on these extreme physical restraints just to find peace, how does that actually work in everyday life?
It gets complicated.
I mean, it's one thing to unpack this in a professional dungeon, but taking these intense needs home changes the entire dynamic. And the sources dive into Mistress Louise's work coaching couples, which is fascinating. There was one specific story that completely rewired how I think about rest.
You're talking about the husband who is constantly busy in his head.
Yes.
Yes.
The ultimate overthinker, a guy whose brain simply will not shut off, which is something I think almost everyone listening can relate to on some level.
Oh, absolutely.
But his specific requirement for shutting down wasn't a glass of wine or like a Netflix binge. It wasn't even sexual in a traditional sense. His profound need was for total sensory deprivation and physical restriction.
The mechanics of what he required are very specific. He needed to be blindfolded.
Right.
He needed heavy earmuffs. He needed to be physically tied to a couch. And then, crucially, he needed to be left completely alone in that state for an hour.
Just abandoned, tied up, in the dark, in total silence.
Yeah.
And for him, this wasn't a punishment. This was the only way his nervous system could achieve a total reset.
Yeah.
It's like a forced meditation retreat. You literally have to strap him down to help him find Zen. But neurologically, why does that work?
Well, it works because it physically enforces stillness, which bypasses the cognitive loop that keeps him anxious.
Okay, so it forces the brain to stop.
Right. When you are physically immobilized and deprived of sensory input, your brain's fight or flight response initially assesses the situation. But because there's profound trust and explicit consent, he knows he is safe. The brain stops scanning for threats.
Oh, wow.
It receives an undeniable physical signal that it doesn't need to do anything because it literally can't do anything. It is absolute permission to power down.
But providing that permission was actually incredibly hard for his wife, right? Like, she deeply wanted to give him this peace, but she completely lacked the dominant confidence to execute it.
It's a huge mental block for a lot of partners.
The source notes that her instinct was that she needed to stay in the room and, play with herself. She felt this pressure to make it valid by making it sexual.
She felt she had to perform. She couldn't grasp that her absence was the gift. And this is where Louise's coaching comes in.
What did she do?
Louise had to help the wife build the specific, dominant confidence required to safely tie her husband up, look at him, and confidently walk out the door, just knowing that leaving him helpless was exactly the care he requested.
And here's where the context becomes everything. The source adds this incredible nuance. For this specific husband, being tied up and left alone was the ultimate peace.
Right.
But Louise points out that you could perform that exact same physical sequence, the ropes, the blindfold, walking out with a different client,
Yeah.
and it would trigger a massive humiliation kink.
Yeah.
For someone else, being left alone means you aren't important enough for my time.
It perfectly illustrates how beautifully adaptable the human brain is. The exact same physical stimuli trigger entirely different psychological responses, depending entirely on the internal mission of the submissive.
That is so interesting.
The brain assigns meaning to the restraint. I would actually challenge you, listening to this deep dive right now, to think about what unconventional things you do to reset your own nervous system.
Oh, that's a great point.
You might not need ropes and earmuffs, but we all have strange contextual triggers. Maybe it's driving with the radio off or lying on the floor in a dark room, things that signal to our brains that it's finally safe to let go.
But I mean, if your requirement for a reset is that extreme, if you actually do need the ropes and the blindfold, how on earth do you navigate the dating world?
It's not easy.
You can't exactly keep that a secret from a life partner. Hiding a need that big feels like a ticking time bomb for a relationship.
It absolutely is. And the sources address this head on when discussing what they call the vanilla pool.
The vanilla pool being the general dating population who don't identify with any particular kinks.
Right. And Louise's advice for navigating the vanilla pool is completely uncompromising. She says that if you have kinks, or if you require non-monogamy, you must disclose it incredibly early.
Like how early?
Her strategy is radical honesty. Do not wait a year into a relationship to casually bring up that you need sensory deprivation to function. She advises putting it right there in your dating profile.
Really?
Yeah, just right. I don't like vanilla.
Okay, I hear that, but practically speaking, dropping "I need to be tied to a couch on a first date over coffee" sounds like a fantastic way to clear a room. Isn't that a bit intense?
Well, it might clear the room of the wrong people, which is exactly the point. From a psychological standpoint, this strategy of radical pragmatism is flawless.
Because it saves time.
It saves an immense amount of time and honors both people's core needs. What you are avoiding is the absolute tragedy of discovering a fundamental, unresolvable incompatibility 3 years into a deeply loving relationship.
Yeah, you save yourself the heartbreak of loving someone who can't give you what your nervous system demands.
Precisely. If a need is non-negotiable for your mental health, hiding it is a disservice to everyone involved.
But what if you are already in that loving relationship and these needs surface later? The video highlights a really interesting conversation about compromise.
Oh, I loved this part.
Yeah. One of the speakers admits she is strictly monogamous. She knows herself well enough to know she is way too jealous for an open relationship. But she says that if she were married to a man who truly needed a pain kink for his mental peace, she absolutely would not let him go to a professional mistress to get it.
Her solution is a testament to how fluid our boundaries can become when anchored in love.
Right. She basically says, no way you're going to another woman. I will go take a course, I will buy a leather suit, and I will do it myself.
It's amazing.
She is willing to adapt to that extreme just for her partner. And it sparks this great realization in the interview. By being willing to put on the leather suit and inflict pain to fulfill his needs, she realizes she isn't purely vanilla after all. She is stracciatella.
Stracciatella.
Huh.
Vanilla ice cream, but with little dark bits of kink mixed in.
It's such a funny, perfect term. And it proves that our limits aren't always these rigid walls. Sometimes they shift based on who we are with.
It shows that psychological adaptability goes both ways. You can stretch your own boundaries to accommodate someone else's nervous system reset, provided the foundation of trust is strong enough.
That makes total sense. But, even with all this radical honesty, and even in a subculture that prides itself on being entirely open-minded, everyone still has a breaking point.
They do.
Which brings us to my absolute favorite part of this deep dive, the garbage bag dilemma.
Oh my God, yes.
Because as it turns out, even a professional BDSM coach has a limit.
Yes. Despite striving to operate completely without prejudice, Mistress Louise shares a story about a client request that genuinely stumped her.
So good.
She was contacted by a man whose ultimate overriding fetish was simply, garbage bags.
Garbage bags.
Yeah.
Nothing else. Just a hefty bag. And the sheer lack of inspiration this caused Louise is hilarious to me. Because she's a professional. Her sessions run for a minimum of 2 hours.
Right.
And she is sitting there trying to fathom the mechanics of this, like, what on earth am I supposed to do with a grown man in a garbage bag for 120 minutes?
She was entirely uninspired. The aesthetic, the psychology, nothing about it engaged her dominant drive. And the resulting brainstorming session they have in the YouTube studio is incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Sophie, tapping into that same unhinged, spontaneous creativity we saw with the Lego blocks earlier, immediately starts firing off ideas to help Louise.
Sophie's just pitching ideas like a Hollywood writer's room. Make him roll around on the floor, make him listen to the crinkling of the plastic.
Yeah.
And then they reach the absolute peak of the brainstorm. They suggest forcing him to do zaklopen, which is the Dutch word for sack racing.
Sack racing. In a dungeon.
Yes. Imagine paying for this intense, dark, secretive environment, expecting profound psychological domination, and you find yourself doing a literal sack race across the floor in a trash bag.
It's absurd.
The line between a dark, intense psychological fetish and a game you play at a 7-year-old's birthday party is surprisingly, hilariously thin.
It is a very funny image, but, it actually grounds this entire philosophy with a vital insight.
Which is?
Even in a subculture that has actively worked to completely erase societal boundaries and shame, personal boundaries still exist.
Right, like erasing the shame doesn't mean you have to erase your own preferences.
Exactly. There are boundaries of energy, boundaries of inspiration, and boundaries of joy. Louise realized that she doesn't have to participate in someone else's deepest desires if those desires don't spark her own creativity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You can be radically accepting of someone's kink, you know? You can validate their need for a garbage bag without having to be the one to fulfill it.
Which basically brings us full circle. We've journeyed all the way from Sophie discovering her natural dominance and threatening people with Lego blocks.
To husbands achieving a complete nervous system reset by being tied to a couch.
Right, to the sheer pragmatism of dating as a stracciatella personality. And finally, to the creative limits of a garbage bag sack race.
And the through line connecting all of these seemingly wild scenarios is undeniable. Whether you are navigating a corporate boardroom, a marriage, or a dungeon bedroom, reclaiming your psychological needs requires absolute radical self-acceptance.
Exactly. And for you listening right now, the takeaway isn't that you need to go out and buy a leather suit or start demanding blindfolds.
No, definitely not.
The real lesson here is about taking a hard look at your own life and figuring out which of society's lines you are staying inside simply out of habit, rather than out of actual desire. Where are you erasing yourself to fit a narrative that someone else wrote for you?
And that leaves us with one final lingering thought to explore on your own. It builds directly on Sophie's belief that the societal rules we blindly follow are just constructs imposed by dominant people long ago.
Okay, I love this theory.
If all societal norms were designed by dominant personalities demanding conformity, are the mundane, everyday rules you follow without thinking actually just someone else's kink that you've been forced to participate in without your consent?
Yeah. Next time you're carefully coloring inside the lines, you might just want to stop and wonder whose picture you're really finishing. Until next time.